everyone. My name is Andrea Lee. I teach at Austin Peay State University in the USA, and this presentation is entitled Examining EFL Students' Views of Intercultural Communication During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Okay, so the purpose of this study was to gain insight into South Korean EFL students' views of the importance of intercultural communication and how they perceive intercultural communication issues in the news during the COVID pandemic. In addition, it sought to obtain recommendations from South Korean EFL students to improve intercultural communication in different facets of life. And these were the three main research questions that guided this study. The first one being, how do South Korean EFL students describe the importance of intercultural communication? How do South Korean EFL students perceive intercultural issues in the news during the COVID-19 pandemic? And finally, what recommendations do South Korean EFL students have to improve awareness of intercultural communication? So the significance of this study, so learning more about students' perceptions of intercultural communication and news issues during this critical period can potentially aid in developing and enhancing future intercultural communication classes, and perhaps even other classes that incorporate intercultural communication themes into the curriculum. And next, there were two main themes focused on in the literature review. The first was intercultural communication. So for English language learners, gaining more awareness into intercultural communication is critical. It's important for students to be able to effectively interact with people from different cultures. And this pandemic period especially has also shown the world the importance of working together. Local communities, we have to work together internationally to solve problems as well. And this is a key quote here from Schwartz. This pandemic is a historical moment that will have a lasting effect on the ways in which people, communities, and nations relate to one another. Okay, and then finally, educators have a key role to play in creating classrooms that foster active engagement in local communities, society, and the world as a whole. Okay, and the next key point in the literature review is global citizenship education. So aspects of global citizenship education were incorporated into this class. It was a predominant theme that we focused on throughout the semester. So what exactly is global citizenship education? So according to UNESCO, global citizenship education aims to empower learners to engage and assume active roles, both locally and globally, to face and resolve global challenges, and ultimately to become proactive contributors to a more just, peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure, and sustainable world. But this is something that I really wanted to think about when I was designing this course, so that students can be good citizens locally, they can be good citizens to their country, and they can also consider ways that they can contribute to the world. And then finally, global citizenship education also aims to foster active engagement in society, as well as to encourage students to become current and future contributors to global society. So this is some brief information about the study. So the study was conducted during the spring semester of 2020 at a university in central South Korea. There were 14 South Korean university students who were enrolled in an intercultural communication class that was conducted online. Initially, the course had been intended to be on campus, but because of the pandemic, it was fully online. And this study uses a descriptive case study. All right, intercultural communication course information. So just some brief information about the course. The course was a standard 16-week semester course, and some of the principles highlighted in the course include basic intercultural competency and global citizenship education. So respecting people from different cultures, being open-minded, getting as much information as possible about other cultures, accepting the ideas of people from different cultures, trying to get rid of our prejudices, approaching positively towards fellows with different cultures. So overall, just trying to improve our awareness and understanding of different cultures. So for data collection and analysis, so data included individual interviews, a focus group, and essays. And data analysis really focused on examining commonalities and key statements made by participants using thematic coding to find predominant themes that emerged in the research. These were the interview questions that were asked to the students. Why is intercultural communication important? Can you think of some examples in which intercultural communication is important? Have you ever experienced intercultural communication? If so, can you explain your experience or experiences? Can you think of an example or examples of intercultural issues in the news during the COVID-19 pandemic? How do you feel about this issue or issues? What recommendations do you have to improve awareness of intercultural communication in your personal life? And the next question, the same, except on campus, and the next one, the same, but in society. And then finally, do you have any other thoughts related to these topics that you would like to share? So the interviews were telephone interviews, and that's because we had social distancing and there wasn't really any way to meet the students on campus at this time. And the average telephone interview was 10 to 15 minutes. Focus groups. We also had semi-structured focus groups that were conducted on Zoom. And I wanted to really gain more clarity about the participants' interview responses. So I used the same questions as the interview, but I just wanted more elaboration and to gain a little more insight into the participants' perceptions of the different topics that were discussed. And the focus group was 20 minutes. And essays. So at the end of the semester, students wrote on the following essay topics. These had to be narrowed down a bit because obviously, students can't write as much in comparison to speaking and sharing their verbal responses. So the first one was, why is intercultural communication important? Provide some examples. The second one, can you think of an example of an intercultural communication issue in the news during the COVID-19 pandemic? How do you feel about this issue? And finally, what recommendations do you have to improve awareness of intercultural communication? So here are the major results of the study. So one of the first key areas here is the importance of studying intercultural communication. And these are the major themes that were extrapolated from the data. The first one being the need for people to be understanding and knowledgeable about diverse cultures. Next, having respect for other people and cultures. And finally, ensuring that past intercultural conflict doesn't happen in the future. And here are some sample quotes, just some random quotes that I pulled from the data. So first, we are living in a globalized world. We have to constantly interact with people from different cultural backgrounds, not only physically, but virtually on the internet. Especially nowadays, being politically correct is highly debated among people. Hence, the importance of knowing other cultures became a must rather than a choice. People have different customs and values depending on where they are from. Having cultural awareness and knowing how to treat others is the fundamental way to be respectful. On the other hand, ignorance can cause a lot of issues such as ethnocentrism and hatred. Another example from the research is, firstly, intercultural communication is a way to learn about other unfamiliar cultures. For example, I talked about the rising sun flag in my first discussion. It's a symbol of a painful history that occurred during the Japanese colonial era. However, some cultures are not familiar with this history. To prevent problems, it is important to learn about history and culture. And next, looking at major themes pertaining to intercultural issues in the news, and these were the dominant topics that were discussed. The first one, discrimination toward Asians. The second, Black Lives Matter movement. And the third, issues specifically affecting Korea. Here are some sample quotes related to some of these topics. So I recently read an article about President Moon Jae-in's speech regarding the Korean War. He said, "We pursue peace and intend to live well together. We will continuously search for routes that are mutually beneficial for both Koreas through peace. Before speaking, I hope that we can become friendly neighbors first." I agree with this speech. It's necessary to know about North Korea's culture first before talking about unification. The Korean War ceasefire took place in 1953. The war was a tragic event in Korean history. This resulted from ideological differences. I hope this kind of conflict is never repeated. I hope the two Koreas give each other reconciliation rather than weapons. And then next, the Black Lives Matter movement has changed the world. It's important for people to know about the struggles of Black people and to make changes in society through action. And then finally, some major recommendations, and I broke these down into 5 predominant themes. The first one, reading about other cultures to gain awareness of other cultural experiences, norms, traditions, etc. Interacting with diverse people on social media, and this is especially critical during the COVID period since there isn't as much face-to-face interaction, especially when the study took place in the spring of 2020. Watching cultural videos, especially on YouTube and other websites, to gain more awareness of different cultures, being more accepting and open-minded of diversity, and finally, studying historical events related to intercultural communication. We often hear the saying, history repeats itself, and obviously learning from the past can benefit us from making the same mistakes or similar mistakes in the future. And these are a few representative sample quotes. The most important thing is to have mutual respect and be open-minded. If you think your culture is the best and look down on other cultures, you can't communicate across cultures. You should also learn other languages. Communicate through language and enter their culture directly and learn more deeply. There are foreign students at my university, but I've been afraid to approach them. We have to reach out and get to know diverse people though. And finally, of course, this study has limitations. The participants were limited to 1 class. There's a low number of participants, and obviously the results can't be generalized across South Korea or even other educational contexts. But nevertheless, there are, some key findings here that are important to examine more. And ideas for future research. So future research could more concretely examine the impact of intercultural communication courses on actual intercultural competence, measuring that. Another idea, intercultural competence should also be studied after course completion to see if students are still aware of the concepts that were taught in class, and to potentially examine if students are still continuing to learn about intercultural communication and striving to learn about cultural diversity and taking that a step further, being good local citizens, being good national citizens, and of course being global citizens, especially in this era of the pandemic where we can see just how critical global communication is. And finally, these are my references. So thank you so much for watching this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is leea@apsu.edu. Thank you again. Bye, everybody.